So today on May 16th, 2023, Jupiter moves from Aries into Taurus, where Jupiter is actually going to stay for like a year. And this brings big things because big is what Jupiter does. If you don't know me already, I'm Crystalline. I'm your astrological mentor. And I want to tell you a little bit about the unique situation that we're having as Jupiter moves from Aries into Taurus. So we're going to go through a couple things today, including the nature of Jupiter in Taurus. What does that mean? What does it mean for you? And then the very first aspect that Jupiter makes, which we'll perfect tomorrow on the 17th, we're going to talk about the Jupiter-Pluto cycle, something which is a bit bigger than just a personal life experience. So we'll jump into that. There's going to be a couple little extra fun nuggets on the way. And I hope that you enjoy this look into the effects of Jupiter and Taurus, how you can use it, what it might reveal to you, and then what we might be noticing, especially in the headlines over the next coming days. Okay, so first and foremost, Jupiter in Taurus. Jupiter has a cycle of about 12 years where it takes 12 years for Jupiter to, let's say, be in Taurus and then make its way all the way around the zodiac to come back to Taurus again. So thinking about 12 years ago, you may have noticed similar things coming up then as you will over this next year. And especially if you have natal placements in Taurus or square to Taurus or opposing Taurus. I'm going to show you what this looks like on a chart in just a minute. The reason that these aspects are more noticeable for us is because square aspects and opposition aspects, so square to the Taurus sign or opposing Taurus, which would be Scorpio, because of them creating these aspects, which generally cause action in our lives or even conflict in our lives, we notice them more. So they stand out. And that's really what we're talking about when we say either it's in conjunction, it's there in Taurus, or it is square it or opposite it. So it's in a place where not only do they see each other, but they're having a conversation and there's action happening in that exchange. So I'm actually going to share the chart for you to be able to see all of this. There's going to be a couple chart sharings today, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see the ingress of Jupiter into Taurus. Here we go. So this is, of course, the wonderful Luna program. And so everything in here that you see today is, I'm going to kind of show you how it all works as well. So what we're looking at here is we want to find Jupiter. Jupiter is right here. You can actually click on it and make it a lot easier to find. So this is Jupiter at 0 degrees, 0 minutes in Taurus. I know like the symbol is a little bit off, but that's because there's so much going on in Taurus right now as well. And even the moon is going to be coming in shortly after this for a new moon in Taurus with Jupiter, who is the great benefic there. I'll be making a separate video about that, but this is one of the first moons in a while where it's like, oh, hey, we have a comfortable new moon. So looking forward to that as well. But thinking about Jupiter in Taurus. Now, Jupiter is going to be in Taurus from May 16th this year until May 25th, 2024. So we actually have a good long time of Jupiter being here, spending a solid year in Taurus, which is typical as we think of Jupiter's cycle being 12 years and there are 12 signs. So you basically can reason that you're going to get about a year out of each sign, depending on how close Jupiter retrogrades to a cusp, like Jupiter did with Pisces. We had Jupiter in Pisces, and then Jupiter went back a little bit, and then Jupiter came into Pisces again. Actually, it was Jupiter in Pisces into Aries, back to Pisces, and then stayed in Aries for a while. But it was a very whirlwind time of Jupiter in Aries. Now we come into, naturally, a pretty solid time of Jupiter being in Taurus. And I say naturally because fixed and earth and nature are all qualities that Taurus actually has. And so what I'm going to do is refer really quickly to Valens, the Vettius Valens Anthology, to be exact. If you're interested, it's on page 7, The Nature of Taurus. All the signs are in there. One of the fun things that we can think about with Taurus is that Taurus is a sign of productive order. It's earthy and rustic. It's related to farming, and a freedman, which again, people who are working on the farm. I actually learned that while learning Greek this week, which was fun. It also is indicative of estates and possessions. So thinking about how Taurus deals with estates and possessions and natural resources, if we think about what comes around on the farm, right? So we're looking at those things being influenced by the qualities of Jupiter and receiving the great benefics kind of blessing over this next year. I'm going to actually refer to the book Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. This one's really great for getting into astrology and starting to understand how you can relate to the planets and all of those things that are associated with them. So in Tarnas's book, we say that Jupiter is the principle of expansion, magnitude, growth, elevation, superiority, the capacity and impulse to enlarge and grow, to ascend and progress, to improve and magnify. There's a lot more in that paragraph, but you can already see how Jupiter goes big. That's what Jupiter does. Jupiter is the great benefic. And so with that, we see that perhaps production of food or material resources or estates grows over the next year. This is something that is kind of nice to think about, especially since we've also been dealing with on this chart. You can see Uranus has been hanging out here. Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, and Uranus does renovation, revolution, liberation, lots of eccentric and new things, lots of 180s, lots of change, lots of upheaval. It doesn't do stability very well. And again, the book Cosmos and Psyche really explains Uranus in a great way. Richard Tarnas even has another book called Prometheus the Awakener, because he compares Uranus and the effects of Uranus to Prometheus and that myth in lore. Really great books, highly recommend them. And what I can do is I'll probably link the books that I reference in the caption of this video so that you can access them too if you want to explore them deeper. So thinking about Jupiter coming into Taurus, we see that Jupiter is bringing expansion to areas that Taurus governs: natural resources, again, stability, structures, systems that are supported by the structures, if we think about a larger scale. So again, think about food on a larger scale or agriculture on a larger scale. This is something that Jupiter is going to be doing over the course of a year. So we're going to see that effect slowly unfold because Jupiter is moving at that pace, whereas the sun takes a month and is out of a sign. So you can think about the way that they compare their speeds to each other. So with this, I would personally recommend looking at where Taurus is in your chart to see what this means for you. If you are, as this chart is for the location, a rising of Virgo, then you're going to have this in the 9th house. You can think about 9th house themes expanding for you over the next year. Think about where Taurus falls on your chart. Think about planets that it might be interacting with in your chart specifically. If you happen to be born in late April, earlier May, you might have the sun in Taurus. And so with this, Jupiter may actually conjunct your sun over the course of this period, which brings a lot of personal growth and expansion for you, and a lot of fortune and those kinds of things. So if something for you is in Taurus, or if it is square, so that would be in Aquarius, in Leo, or in Scorpio, well, Aquarius or Leo for squares, and then Scorpio for opposition. If you have any placements here, they may receive a conjunction, a square, or an opposition from Jupiter, which might bring noticeable things into your life over the course of the next year. So that is something to think about as we're looking at what Jupiter is doing during his time in Taurus. Now we're going to move into the first aspect that Jupiter makes. You may have seen it, but if you missed it, I'm going to show you in just a second. Okay, so I want to show my screen right off the bat with this one so that you can see what we're looking at here. Now, aside from the rising, so the chart is a little bit spun around, you can see everything's looking pretty much the same. The moon, as we expected, has moved into Taurus, but this is just a day after Jupiter has actually just moved in. So we've only moved 18-degree minutes in this amount of time, another indication of Jupiter's general pace. But there's something here that is actually really important. And I know with all the lines in the middle and everything, it's kind of rough to see. One of the things I recommend when you're looking at aspects is the lines can be helpful, but if there's a lot of them like this, it's also helpful to just look at the degrees and see if any of them are matching, and then see what angle they make to each other. So when we come around here and we look for another degree that might perhaps be aspecting Jupiter, we're going to look for 0 degrees. And so here we see there's another 0 degree over here with Pluto, and it's at 018, where Jupiter is at 018, and they are 90 degrees from each other. This is a square aspect. So we were just mentioning that here. Jupiter is currently in Aquarius, not for long, Pluto is currently in Aquarius, not for long, because Pluto is retrograde. So Pluto is about getting ready in June sometime, because Pluto's very slow. Around the middle of June, or actually in the first 2 weeks of June, Pluto will move back into Capricorn for a while. So at this moment, we are actually seeing one of the first interactions between Jupiter and Pluto since they conjoined and had a new cycle begin for themselves in 2020. So we're seeing a lot of that story having its first real active progress in this situation. So it's really important to think that a square has an active energy to it. It is of the nature of Mars. So there's a lot of motion happening, a lot of ambition. Sometimes that comes in the form of conflict. So if you think about a square and you're like, what does a square do? Think about what you already know about Mars. And then think, okay, so if I'm thinking how Mars would act, or the kind of action taken in a Mars way, we're looking at that kind of stuff with squares. That's why you might see confrontation or things being brought up with that. I like to say that this is an aspect that puts in work. It creates an opportunity for action to occur. And sometimes that can be really great. Usually in hindsight, it'll be really great. But in the moment, it's something that we have to put effort into. And so we're seeing that as a society. It's another thing I really like about what Tarnas really helps break down with the planets is your personal planets, the ones that are within the ones that are between the Earth and the Sun is really the easiest way to think about it. Mars is also considered a personal planet because of his speed, even though he goes behind the Sun. But so if you think about the planets between the Earth and the Sun, and then also add Mars, you think about the personal planets. They move fast enough that we recognize what they're doing nearly on a daily basis or on a couple days basis because we can track that. But then you get out to Jupiter and Saturn, and because they are a bit slower, we see their effects on more of a social scale. You'll see those in trends that happen. And then when you get even further out there, you have your Neptune, your Uranus, your Pluto. Those happen so slowly. Again, we mentioned Uranus being in Taurus from 2018 to 2026, they happen so slowly that what you're going to notice is it takes a while for us to see the effects of that. For Pluto, it's an entire generation it takes for us to see the effects of that. Pluto is going to spend, once he actually settles into Aquarius, Pluto will be there until 2044. So a solid 20 years will be spent just staying in Aquarius for Pluto. That's an entire generation's worth of people. And if you look at where Pluto is in your chart, it helps you understand what generation you're a part of. So for example, Gen X typically has Pluto in Libra. Millennials have Pluto in Scorpio. Gen Z has Pluto in Sagittarius. Gen Alpha has Pluto in Capricorn. And now we are coming into Gen Beta, if that's what they're going to call them, where they will be the ones to have Pluto in Aquarius. And we're going in this hot and cold time of Pluto dipping back into Capricorn and coming into Aquarius a lot. So this is going to be an interesting transitional time to watch these people grow up and see the difference between people who had Pluto in Capricorn at that time and Pluto in Aquarius at that time. It's going to be fun to observe, and hopefully it'll show us some building going on in society as well. So thinking about Pluto at 0 degrees 18 and Jupiter at 0 degrees 18, the last time they met, we can actually go back, and with this, I used my handy ephemeris function over here, went to my searches, and where did I do this? I looked at the different conjunctions between Pluto and Jupiter, and here they are. This is the last 100 years. So you can see it starts at 1906, which is when they had a conjunction, and they've conjoined a few times since then. But we'll notice that in 2020, they did it 3 times because they both retrograded. So if these dates seem familiar, April 4th, 2020, June 30th, 2020, November 12th, 2020, it's because in the cycle of Jupiter and Pluto, we often find that there are, I don't want to say pandemics, but there often have been epidemics with this. Now, we don't have a conjunction coming up anytime soon, so you're fine. Again, this is the opening square. It's the first interaction with action to it. There was a sextile at a couple months ago too, or even last year. But what we're noticing is this is the first time that we're saying, wow, that happened. What are we going to do about it? So you can see the attitude of Mars coming through in that as well. That happened. We got to move on it now, though. We have to do something. What is that going to be? What have we learned? And what are we going to start working with? So knowing these dates, These actually coincided with spikes of numbers that were associated with COVID-19. So that's something we recognize. But there are also a lot of other things throughout history. And it's always fun to look at the dates you can find when these happened and say, what happened at this time? One of the things I Googled was outbreaks, June 1906, or even just 1906, because you want to give it a little bit of time for it to occur. Maybe the first infection of something happened, or the first incitement, the beginning of something happened on that day or around that day. And then it took time for us to recognize it because, again, Pluto was not a fast mover. So we have a lot of things that happened with this, not just bad things. It's usually things that motivate and compel us into something new. For instance, Pluto, if we look at Cosmos and Psyche again, you can summarize the consensus of contemporary astrologers by saying that Pluto is associated with the principle of elemental power, depth, and intensity, with that which compels, empowers, and intensifies whatever it touches, sometimes to overwhelming and catastrophic extremes. So if you think about it, knowing that we have this in hindsight, so there's really nothing to fear, that is something that we experienced when Jupiter expansion compelled with Pluto's cooperation in their conjunction. We saw an inflation of this thing that created a lot of change and compelled a lot of transformation in the way that we see the world today, the way that we understand the world today, the way that we function now. It changed a lot intrinsically, and like it's something that we became something new as humanity, and now we're moving forward from that. We're growing from that. So if you also think about a conjunction the way you would a new moon, because that is also a conjunction, it's the planting of a seed. And then the first quarter moon is actually the square of the moon, very similar to the phase that we're seeing with Pluto here. And with that, we notice that you're seeing the first bits of progress. This is the sprout finally taking on some leaves. So thinking about it that way, we're looking for the first notes of what we're getting over this new cycle that's going to take a while, right? So thinking about that, when we come back to Pluto squares, Jupiter-Pluto, those conjunctions and squares here. Hang on, let me just find my handy dandy thing that I did, or I can just find it on here. We know it's going to be May 17. Yeah. So the next square between Jupiter and Pluto will be Halloween 2029. So we have that much time before the next square. We'll have an opposition between then. And so we have tons of time to watch this unfold and to react with it and to move with it. So if we come back to the one that's going to happen tomorrow, we see that this is something I would watch TV for or watch the news for, see what happens in the headlines, see what comes around from that. That just noticing even recently that COVID-19 was de-escalated and said, hey, this is not an emergency anymore. It's something that we're living with now. So we notice that that may eventually be attributed to this moment in history, because that was only last week and this is still something that's been applying. It could be, or we'll see what else comes up. I know Valens talks about aspects happening at that moment, but it takes us a while, kind of like a ripple effect or a Doppler effect, for us to be able to recognize it. So I imagine something new will come of it tomorrow. And then over the preceding days, we'll see something come of that as well. Other things that have been associated, you can actually, again, look up those dates that I showed you. But if we look back even just recently, previously we had conjunctions of Jupiter and Pluto in 2007, which was when that H5N1, also known as the bird flu, became had a moment where there was a lot of infection for that. 1994 showed situations in India with resurgence of the bubonic plague. 1981, many people will know, HIV was a prominent factor with that. 1968, there was a flu in China that had a lot of effect, H2N2 in 1956. So you can see again how these things way back into Greece, once we discovered Pluto and could backtrack, we noticed that a lot of situations coincided with that. But I want to show you one that's really cool that I think we don't want to sneeze at, because we can also see the upside here. Now, this is a little bit unique because it is a conjunction between Pluto and Jupiter, and a conjunction. We're in a square. So keep this in perspective that we're looking at the beginning of the cycle. The conjunction starts things. So that's when we really look at what is this going to be about. But on this really cool day, it was July 20th, in 1969. If that sounds familiar to anybody, you're about to see why. So we're going to look at 4:18, let's see, p.m. And we're actually going to set this for Cape Canaveral. Are you getting the hints here? Florida. And so when I cast this chart, what we're going to look at is we've got a Uranus-Jupiter conjunction here, and Pluto is also very close by degree. Now, something that Tarnas will bring in is he's going to give a little bit of leniency for degrees here, where I might do a little bit differently as a traditional astrologer. I prefer if they are in the same sign. But it is kind of worth noting that this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, something we will see next year, something we will see over the course of this year into next year, since Uranus is also in Taurus, is also happening with Pluto in Libra here. And I'm just double checking my dates to make sure I get this all good, but it looks right. So we see this is the date of the moon landing. So that's really cool to see, again, the progress that can come from this. Now, Uranus has a lot to say about that in this case. But again, we're going to see a Uranus-Jupiter conjunction coming into perfection over the next year. So this is a little spoiler for you. I'll probably be covering this on its own, in its own time. So that is all I wanted to say about the Jupiter and Pluto square. Things to think about. Again, this is going to be happening on larger scale things. We're going to see this happening in society. Think about the nature of Jupiter, the nature of Pluto, the nature of a square. Jupiter expansion, leading to progress. Jupiter has a lot to do with philosophy, with travel, with expanding your knowledge and your wisdom and your understanding. Pluto, that transformation, the death and rebirth cycle of letting something end so something new can come back, knowing that this is a square, so it's of the nature of Mars, which brings action, which brings movement, potentially some conflict, but some kind of progress with it. And that this is the unfolding of a sequence that we are understanding started in 2020. So it's not a whole bam, new, didn't see this coming thing. It's a progress of this story. So I encourage you to journal what you see and give yourself a couple days. Let the headlines unfold so you can say, oh, wow, these themes that we mentioned here are unfolding, and we're seeing it kind of like a fill in the blank Mad Lib situation. And I hope that this sparks your curiosity with astrology even more. Thank you guys so much.